Hello, Anne Marie.
Hello.
We are not doing this live. We're doing this as a recording because Anne Marie pointed out that I probably have a funny group setting in my Facebook group. So I'm going to figure it out. Eventually, we'll figure out this whole going live thing because other people do it better than I do. So in the meantime, we're here to talk about analytics and data. I know people in the group have been posting a ton of questions, so I have my laundry list here for you. But before we dive into that, do you want to give a quick rundown on who you are and what you do and your specialties?
Absolutely. My name is Anne Marie O'Braskin. I have been working in the digital marketing space for about 10 years now. And I work from home with my 2.5-year-old daughter.
Hence the Peppa Pig on the wall.
Exactly. My background, very festive. And I love helping women running businesses online with their analytics and marketing strategy. So basically what that means is I look at your data, or I help you look at your data and figure out exactly what you should do so that you can stop wasting time on all of the stuff that isn't actually making you money, and you can get all that time back in your schedule. Plus you can make more money because you're able to dedicate that time to actual revenue producing activities.
So when you're talking about, and we're going to dive into, a lot of it has to do with website stuff, but the first question that pops to mind as you were describing that is social media, so hot right now, as you know, they say in Zoolander. But you know, again, we were joking as we were prepping for this call, both of us are feeling a little overwhelmed sometimes by the amount of stuff going on Facebook, for example. When you're talking about analytics, do you look at social media specifically? Are you diving into those components, or are you specifically focused on website stuff?
Both.
Okay.
Because I think that one of the most important concepts to remember when you're looking at analytics is that it all has to work together. If you look at things as individual silos, you might be able to get individual channels to work well, but when you look at it as a whole, you can only make everything better.
And again, I have a variety of skill levels listening to this. So let's start at the basics. So talk about analytics versus metrics, you know, and I know a lot of my clients are not familiar with why they should even care in some cases. Mm-hmm. You know, we're going to stick with digital marketing. We're going to ignore email for a moment, because that's a whole nother topic for another day. Maybe we'll do one next month on email. But, you know, how do you define helping people understand what they should be focused on? Not, you know. Yeah. I'll leave the question there.
So what I like to do is, when we're deciding what an individual business should focus on, we start, like, the very first thing we determine, what are your conversions? Now, your conversion is the last trackable step that someone can take to become a customer. So depending on how your business is set up, that can be a couple of different things. Sometimes it's just a straight purchase. So say you sell an online course, your conversion is someone buying that course and they become a customer. Mm-hmm. But if you're a service provider, you may not actually have that transaction on your website, in which case your conversion might be someone scheduling a call with you, if they can do that through your site. And so that can be a really powerful thing to track. So the first thing that we want to determine is, what are we tracking? Because that's going to guide the rest of what you're looking at. And something that I really like to focus on is just keeping it simple. You don't need to measure 25 things. Like, honestly, tracking 5 things is sufficient. And if you know those 5 things, then you can make smart decisions and that you will actually see results from. So we're going to look at the conversions, and then we're going to look at our goals, which are like the smaller action steps that someone takes that probably isn't, it's probably not like a financial transaction, but maybe it's signing up for your newsletter or like reading a blog post, even something in that, you know, like know, like, trust, that type of deal where they're liking and they're trusting you.
Gotcha. So if I were going to use my business as an example, I'm a service provider, you know, outside of whatever industry you're in. Again, I feel like some of the e-commerce type activities or the purchase to attend something is a little more concrete. in ways. But as a service provider, I don't expect to get, leads or potential prospects, potential customers through my website. I get the majority of my contacts through word of mouth and networking and marketing and people like you who do specific things, and we partner and share. So in terms of tracking, you're talking about words that you used in there was conversions. We talked about leads specifically. So the idea for me is, while I do have a website, let's say there's somebody watching this in the Facebook group, for example, who then sends me an email that says, so the tracking of it would be somebody in the Facebook group and said, hey, I noticed you in your actual marketing Facebook group. I love your content, for example. They sent me a note and said, hey, I really want to talk to you about my marketing strategy. And I get an email from that. That would be a conversion, correct?
Correct. Yep.
Okay. Cool.
Yeah, so what you can do there is basically what we're looking at and what we are tracking. Even if it doesn't happen through your website, you can kind of do the analog version of it, where you're still tracking it on a simple spreadsheet and you're just plugging it in. So it doesn't have to be this super complicated thing, and it doesn't have to be like fancy tech and tools. You can use a spreadsheet. You can use all free tools. It doesn't even have to cost you money, because the main tool that I recommend is Google Analytics, and that's free. So
yes, I love Google Analytics.
Me too.
They keep changing stuff on me though, so things get buried.
That's why it's so important to really narrow down your focus. And especially as someone going in, a small business owner who maybe isn't in love with numbers, like, you can go in, and as long as you go in with a question, like go in with something specific that you're looking at, it can be really easy to pull those numbers and then just kind of back out of Google Analytics and not get distracted by the 10,000 things that you can learn in there. Like, you need to keep it simple so that it doesn't get overwhelming.
Gotcha. So, all right. So the group's called Actual Marketing. You say keep it simple. Give us the top 3 things that you think people should be tracking. Small businesses, let's start there.
Yep.
Again, larger corporations and things like that, there's different metrics, and we'll get to that in a minute. But what are the basics?
Yep. For each channel, which I mean by channel, I would mean, say, your Facebook page, your Instagram profile, wherever you're sharing your message.
Pinterest?
Yep, could be Pinterest. Literally anywhere that you're marketing yourself. You want to track your impressions, which is how many times your content is seen on that platform. And basically, that's like, if you're thinking about a sales funnel, that's the top of the funnel. That's the entire pool of people that in a given time frame could have become customers because they knew about you. Then from there, I want you to track your sessions on your website. So that's how many people are clicking in, they're learning more about you, they're indicating that they're more interested. And then your goals and your conversions, which are just the people that took action.
Impressions, starting with that, where do you get that information? Is that in Google as well?
No, that's in the
channel itself.
Yeah, everything except impressions can be found in Google Analytics.
Okay.
And then the impressions, you do have to go to each channel individually.
So for example, Actual Marketing has 190 people in it. Impressions would be 190 people, or per post, I think it gives you a number of people who've seen it.
Yeah.
If you're a moderator in a group or a page, even on LinkedIn, it does the same thing. You can pull that number from the number of eyeballs you've had on the post.
Exactly. And now, and on something that is, so for a Facebook group, you would see numbers differently because the data just shows itself differently. But for, say, a public Facebook page, you have the opportunity to be seen by more than just the people who follow you. So you want to make sure you go in and you look at the impressions. Whereas with the Facebook group, there's a finite number, like there's a maximum that can be seen. So you definitely want to look, I would say, at the impressions specifically, just to see how many, like you said, how many eyeballs actually saw it. Especially with social media and algorithms, you need to see like the actual numbers versus, 10,000 people like my Facebook page. That's a huge number. I don't know why
your conversions are going to suck.
Right.
I mean, maybe they won't. Maybe your business is huge and like you're killing it right now, which would be awesome.
Right. But I mean, if if you're looking at your total number of fans on Facebook, that number is going to be way different than the number of people who actually saw your content.
Gotcha. Instagram for a second too.
Mm-hmm.
I just launched an account for Jessica in marketing. And it's interesting because I tagged it as a business account. I have a personal one, I built up a following there, but Instagram gives you all of those metrics as well, if I'm not mistaken. So look at those.
Yeah. Instagram gives you a lot more than people realize. And you can even see all of the analytics on your stories as well.
Oh, cool. Oh,
yeah.
So going down the level, when you're talking about the sales funnel, so if you think about a little funnel, there's 3 stages that she's talking about here. We're talking about impressions are the ones that you drop into the top of the funnel to get all of the eyeballs. So going down a level in terms of sessions, we're talking about Google Analytics specifically. I know in Google you have sessions and unique sessions. Can you talk about the difference and kind of what a session is to educate folks?
Yep. So a session, it tracks when someone gets to your website. And so a session would be if somebody clicks through from your Facebook post and goes to your website, that tracks as a session. Even if they do that multiple times, that's going to be different sessions. And I like to track the total number of sessions versus the total number of unique sessions, because if someone's coming there multiple times, I want to know that. Like, I want to know that that they're visiting.
Yeah. All of that. Again, do you recommend, another thing about Google is the dates. So keep an eye on when you're looking at the sessions per date. So make sure your dates are consistent week over week, that you're looking at the same time period.
Yes.
Otherwise your numbers get screwy.
Absolutely. Yeah. And that's something I do on a weekly basis, and then have to go back and relook at things.
Me too. Because you're always mucking with stuff in there.
Yep.
All right. So I'm looking, I have my laundry list of questions over here that people have asked too. Let's finish off the funnel for a second. So you're talking about goals and conversions. You can set a lot. Do you have some best practices, really quick tips, when you're thinking about goals and conversions for your website specifically, what to include in there if people are just getting started?
Yeah, absolutely. Think about what people are actually doing. Don't think about creating something new. Like, think about your last few clients or your last few customers and what steps they actually took. So were they on your email list before they bought your product? If so, then joining your email list should be a goal, because it makes them more likely. If there
That's a great tip right there. Like, seriously, mapping out your last 3 clients and going through what the steps they took, like that's a great idea.
And it just saves you so much time, because you don't have to create something from scratch. Like, just don't do it if you don't have to.
Yeah.
And then I would say for your conversions, just make it easy on yourself. So if there's something that is really difficult to track, or isn't consistent in being able to track it, just do it manually. Like, especially if your numbers are low. And I don't mean that, like, that's not a negative. Just like, if you only work with a handful of clients, it's easy enough for you to individually put in, okay, I signed a client this week. You can just add that to your spreadsheet. So don't get hung up on the tech of it if it's causing you issues.
Cool. Those are good starting points, because a lot of that stuff can get overwhelming. Even, I've done it for large companies that I've worked for, and you get in there and, working with my teams, there's basic metrics, I'll talk about blogs for a second. There's basic metrics to figure out if your blog is working or not, and driving the traffic and conversions that you want. So going in week over week and being diligent about it, because you're not always, you're publishing blog posts on different days every week, and so your time periods, it becomes a headache. So normalizing the numbers behind it and figuring out and comparing, managers love to ask, what's our best blog post last month? I know I've done it. And you're like, I don't, so getting into the habit of tracking what the metrics are that matter for you and your business is, those are some good tips.
Exactly. And one more thing, when you said that, it reminded me, when you're tracking these things, whether you're doing it weekly or monthly, make note if there was anything like different that happened. So if you specifically went in one week and you spent 5 hours creating new pins and pinning on Pinterest, and that's not something you normally do, just make a note so that you'll be able to see if that like paid off. Because even though right now you think it's obvious, like, oh yeah, well, I know I did that last week.
You're not going to remember.
Right. Like a month from now, you might not remember which week you did it. So just make those notes and you will make life easier on yourself.
Even when, I recommend to clients, note when you send your newsletter out, because you're going to see a traffic spike, especially if you're looking to your website. That'll explain it. So you'll get used to seeing the spikes, even if you send them on a different day. Like that's a totally annotate the crap out of it.
Yep.
All right. I'm going to look at my list. We got a laundry list here. So one of the questions that I think is important is the question is, how do I communicate those analytics to others? Data is great, but being able to understand is better. So again, as a business owner, I don't need to communicate my metrics to anybody. I just need to look at them myself and make sure they're relevant for me. But let's say you're on a team or you're working in an agency or you're trying to communicate it out. Do you have some best practices to share there?
Yes. I have been in that situation many times. So
too.
I have picked up some things that have helped. One thing to remember is everyone who looks at the report is not necessarily the person that you speak directly with. So make sure that things are clear on your report. And then if someone, say the CEO of the company, picked up the report, they'd at least be able to understand the context. And just like a very basic best practice is have like one dashboard at the very top with just like the top of line numbers. And those numbers should be for the person that you speak directly with, whether it is the owner of a company or it's like a marketing director or something like that. Ask them what they need to prove to whoever's above them to make that it's working. Like what numbers the person above them cares about.
Yeah.
And that's what needs to be at the top of the report. So if that's sales, you start with sales. If that's like blog readers, start with blog readers, and just make sure that you have that communication open, and also frequently check in and make sure that those things haven't changed.
Or board members, that's another one.
Right. Exactly.
Board members they live and breathe numbers, regardless of if you're small, medium, doesn't matter. You have a board, there's people that you're talking to. That's what that's a good one.
Yeah. And make note of the questions that they'll ask. Because a lot of time they'll come back and they'll ask questions, and if they ask a question more than once, it probably needs to be added to the report on a regular basis.
That's a great point. But also, if you feel like that metric may not be the right metric, it gives you an opportunity to say, I'm not sure that's right. What are you really looking for? And I'll make sure I'm pulling the right information.
Yes, absolutely. Because there might be something that you can provide that's better than what they're asking for. And also, a lot of times people will ask for things like, we want more followers. And sometimes that's
one of the questions on the list.
Oh, really? Yeah. And so sometimes part of what you're doing is educating your client. They're coming to you because you are an expert and you know more than they do about this particular topic. Like 99% of the time, that's why they've hired you. And so if they come to you and they're asking for something that you don't think is a good idea, or you don't think is as important as something else, kindly explain to them why you disagree. And you can even say, this is like my go-to is, I can track that if you'd like. Here is what I suggest we do instead. And then that way you're saying, I'm not saying no to you. I can track this number if it is important. But here's what I think, in my expert opinion, is more important, or will explain better our growth. And so that tends to be, almost every time I've had them come back and say, great, we'll do that.
So let's talk about followers, because I would assume that's not always the best metric to track from a social media standpoint. As we talked about impressions earlier,
right.
One of the ones on here is literally, do we follow social media followers or engagements? I want to be clear and say, we're talking about engagements, meaning likes, clicks, shares, stuff like that, comments, how do you, is any of that stuff relevant in general? I know it depends per business and what you do. I'm used to the marketing answer. Well, it depends. Yeah, I know. But we're talking about in general.
Right. If I had to give for one particular business, what I would say is measure your reach. Measure how many people are actually seeing your content. And the good thing is with something like Facebook, they tell you, they will give you the reach of your posts for the last 7 days. And that number is a lot more telling. And it also gives you much better guidance on like the content that you're putting out. Because with Facebook, you aren't limited to, or really most social channels, as long as you have a public profile, which as a business you normally would.
You should.
Yeah. So you have the ability to get in front of more people. So the followers and the likes in general, those are not, they don't tell anything about the value of your page or the value of that channel for the actual money that you're bringing in.
Well, I also think it relates back to target audience. Even if you have a small amount of followers, are they the right followers? And again, this isn't always an analytics question, but it drills down to that. If you sell, I'm just going to think of something random. Let's say you sell mice that are only built for people with left hands who are missing their pinky finger. I'm sure there's an audience for that, and it's probably small, but as long as you're getting in front of those, 2,000 people in the world who have that discrete problem, it doesn't matter how many people follow you. It's how many of them are actually engaging with your brand, to give a tactical example.
Exactly. And with these social platforms, they're showing it to people based on things like engagement. So they're going to show it to more people if you're getting in front of the right people.
Cool.
So
we answered like 6 or 7 of the questions on the list. One of the ones that I just want to clarify too, that somebody asked, the difference between engagement and conversion. I think we've covered that pretty clearly. Engagement, being like a step down from impression, a conversion being somebody who actually makes it to whatever goal that you set. Would you say that's accurate? Or how would you define it?
I would say a conversion is the last step that someone takes to become a customer of yours. Whereas engagement is engagement wouldn't track someone paying money. Engagement is just, I don't want to use the word engage.
Well, it's use it as Twitter. We talked about Facebook and Instagram and Pinterest a little bit, but the idea on Twitter would be like a retweet or if they're favoriting or replying to it, starting a conversation, that would be engagement. Anything that it stays on the platform, but they're interacting. Gotcha. Somebody asked, does Google Analytics tell you the real story?
I think Google Analytics, it can, but you always need some sort of interpretation. Like, you can't just look at it. You need outside information. It's a great tool, but no. Actually, I'm changing my answer. No, it doesn't tell you the whole story. Because data can always be interpreted. And you need to understand what efforts you have put into it. Because, for example, I'll go back to like what I was saying before. If you spent 5 hours working hard on Pinterest, doing whatever, say you were pinning and repinning and commenting and like engaging on that platform, you can look at that and all of a sudden your numbers have spiked that week, and you say, oh, great, this must mean Pinterest is working for me. But then the next week you don't have 5 hours to spend, or after those 5 hours you're exhausted and drained and you couldn't get your client work done. Like, if there's more negative outside of Google Analytics, like, they don't track that.
Yeah.
Google doesn't care.
So Google is telling you a story and it's real, but it may not be this, it may not, I think the basis of the question comes from like the data that they're providing you is real, but it's the same as like what you put into it. You can't, you can have a bunch of ingredients and you're going to get 8 different recipes out of it, depending on how you put the ingredients together. It all comes back to food in my life.
And that's also assuming that you're using the right ingredients. But if you use
also true,
if you use salt instead of sugar, you're not
your
going
cookies
to
are not going to be good.
You're not going to get a good cookie. So the same thing, like if you aren't tracking the right things, or if it's not installed correctly, then it's not going to tell you the real story. So it is really important to get those foundations set up. And it's not necessarily complicated. It's just something that you need to double check.
Excellent. Are there any last minute tips that you felt like would be relevant? We've talked a lot about the laundry list of questions I have here. So that was good. I think there's some really good, explanations and how to think about this stuff. Google Analytics, Google, spreadsheets. There are more advanced tools you can use, but starting basic is always a good place to start. I have one question. I don't know how relevant it is to small business, but as a marketing leader, do I need to learn SQL? Somebody asked that.
I don't know it, and
I don't either.
I have done just fine in my career, so I would say no.
I would agree with that. Yeah.
I'm sure there's some part of marketing that it would be beneficial for, but
depends on how your data is housed. I've had places where I've had to have SQL developers go on and pull data and do some pivot tables and stuff like that for me with the data, but it depends on what you're doing with it.
I would say it depends on your goals.
Yeah.
Yeah.
They're talking about expensive tools. I'm going to skip that one for now because I think we've covered it. So, all right. So I'll, any last minute tips that you want to share?
Yeah. I will reiterate, don't go into Google Analytics without a specific reason. Like, don't go in to just explore and think that you have to track a ton of things. If you find yourself tracking way too many things, take a step back. I do this constantly. I'll go in and think about a bunch of different metrics that I want to track for something. And then I'll go through and I'll write down all the numbers. And then it's like, well, you know what? That's not really that important. And think about the long-term sustainability of tracking these things. So I still, for my business, I stick with the 5 things, like the impressions, sessions. What did I say? Oh my goodness. Goals and conversions. Well, so actually I do impressions and sessions and conversions, and then I do the click-through rate and the conversion rate, which is just math that I have my spreadsheet do for me. So I don't even have to pull those numbers.
Sneaky.
So just keep it simple. Understand that you need to give it context, and don't base any decision on one number.
Those are good. I would add to it, you need 3 data points to measure a trend. So the number in some cases doesn't always matter. It's the trend line in some,
yes.
Based off the things that you're doing. This is something I've taught my teams for years. To your Pinterest example, if you spend 5 hours one day on Pinterest and you see your number spike, you're like, great. And then you see it dive bomb, or you see it slowly go down. You're like, okay, I knew Pinterest had an impact on my business, regardless of, it's a directional signal there. Say, okay, then to your point, I have to evaluate whether or not it was worth the effort to the outcome, looking at the conversions. So,
right. And if you have a team, remember it, time is a valuable resource, whether you're hiring someone to do it or not. When you're hiring someone, it's easy because you can put an actual number behind it. But even with yourself, remember your time is valuable. So if you can be doing something more valuable with that time, drop it or outsource it.
Yeah. Cool. So thanks for chatting with me.
Yes, thank you. This was fun.
You have, you're doing a class. You want to give a one-liner about your class?
Yeah, absolutely. So it walks through what we were talking about with the metrics that you need to track, but I actually go through and tell you exactly how to do it and where to find each of those numbers, plus that spreadsheet with the formulas I will give you. So
a lot of hand-holding that you're providing.
Yes, and it is free, so you are welcome to get access, and even if you just want my spreadsheet with my formulas.
Sweet. I will, she's working on a landing page. Once we're done with that, send it over and I'll post a link when we post the recording. So
Perfect.
thanks so much, Anne Marie. It was a
Yes.
pleasure.
Thank you.